Hi guys. So here we go with brain dump number 1. I think I'm probably just going to start with the year 2023. It was quite a year for my family and myself, so I'm just going to start with that. So I do want to give a trigger warning. This is going to be about cancer. It'll also be about caretaking. It'll be critical illness, just crazy, scary, intense stuff that might be triggering for some people. So watch cautiously and be aware that if there's some subject matter that's hard for you, skip past it, turn it off, or grab the tissues and be prepared to listen to it. So hopefully it's not too bad for you. Okay, so we'll just start with January of 2023. My husband Derek, who at that time we'd been married about a year and a half, got strep throat. No big deal. My 16-year-old had also just had strep throat. Like, it was just one of those things going around. Except for Derek's just didn't seem to get better. So he'd gone into the doctor, was getting some blood work. They were trying to figure out why his energy levels weren't doing super great. They did some initial blood work and said, hey, you've got some low testosterone. So before insurance would cover any testosterone therapy, they had to do a second blood draw to confirm it. So he went in for a second blood draw. No big deal. Well, Valentine's Day of 2023, so February 14th, he got a call from the doctor that said, hey, second blood draw came back with some concerning things. It could be hundreds of different things, but we're referring you over to hematology so that they can kind of go over what they find in there and run some more tests. So we're okay. Referred us over to the U. At that time, they were scheduled like months out. I believe our appointment was in June or something, if I remember right, before we could even get into them. So we're like, okay, it must not be super scary deal because they're not rushing anything. Hematology, the word alone is scary. However, if there was something scary there, they'd get us in super fast. Fast forward to exactly 1 week later, February 21st, I was getting up, going to work that morning, and that night, Derek had gotten a really bad Charlie horse in his leg. He still wasn't feeling well, to the point where when he'd gone to work on Monday, the 20th, they sent him home sick. He was really yellow, really tired. He had a hard time like walking down the hall and breathing, just really sick. So we thought that the strep throat just had not gotten better and that he needed to get into the doctor, get on a new antibiotic, because they'd just done blood work and they'd just done all these other things, and there wasn't anything crazy going on that we knew about yet. So I went to work that morning, and late that afternoon, I was texting Derek, and he said, hey, I haven't been able to get into the doctor yet. And so I was like, why haven't you gotten into the doctor? We need to do this. You've already been home from work and feeling crappy. Like, we need to find out what's going on and get you seen and on those new antibiotics, we thought. But by the time I got home from work, he was really, really sick. So I walked in the door with the twins after I picked them up from daycare, just normal day. Frustrated. I was really frustrated as his partner, as his wife. Like, why can't you make a doctor's appointment and get into the doctor? Not having any idea how sick he was, because things had escalated terribly while I was gone to work. I got home and he couldn't walk. Not only could he not walk, but he couldn't sit up out of bed. He made it a couple of steps. We couldn't even get him in the car to take him to the ER. I had to call an ambulance. He was extremely yellow, extremely lethargic. I don't think he really remembers much of what was happening even then. The paramedics got here and I was trying to balance between my little 6-year-old daughters, not knowing what's going on with dad, and, what appeared to be my really sick husband. So the ambulance people said, hey, he's pretty sick, just from what they could tell from his initial blood work while they were here. So they transported him by ambulance and transported him over to one of our local hospitals. We got into the ER there. The doctor came in and said, yeah, he's really sick. So they were running some tests and things like that. And I told him that we were waiting on a hematology appointment at the U. And so he's like, okay, let me contact them and get those results and kind of see where we were at with that. I got to tell you guys, this hospital that we were at, I normally love them. I advocate for them. I've had nothing but great experiences there with them for myself. That's where I had my twins. Trust them wholeheartedly. But this doctor and this experience was very different. I hope that nobody else has to go through an experience like I did with this doctor. So we had the twins there with us because we didn't know what we were dealing with. And we didn't have any other option anyway. I mean, it's always just he and I and the kids. So they were sitting there in the ER with me when the doctor just blatantly walked in and said, well, he's got leukemia. We're sending him up to Huntsman's. How do you react to that, Sorry, guys. So I'm, looking over at my little girls sitting there in this room, playing on their tablet, just being amazing, great kids that they are, and having no idea of what's going on until, the doctor walks in and says that. And not that they understood, but everything in the room changes. Derek was so sick. I don't know if he even remembers that conversation. You're trying to balance between listening to what the doctor says, being present for your partner, to be supportive, all of that, and also trying to protect your kids from understanding what's going on and seeing you completely lose your shit. So yeah, that moment. Fast forward a little bit, they get him transferred up to Huntsman. They are loading him on the ambulance. It was the biggest blizzard we'd had that year, and it was really bad, roads and everything. So he told me to take the girls home. It was midnight at that point, and they hadn't eaten dinner. They just had snacks that I'd packed in my purse on the way to the ER, that kind of stuff. So I took them home. It was explained to us by the ER doctor that they were going to take him up to Huntsman, give him a blood transfusion, get his levels stabilized, and then they would, decide how they wanted to move forward with treatment and whatever. But wasn't made to be nearly as big of a deal as what we ended up dealing with. So I got the twins home, fed them, got them to sleep, checked in at the hospital to make sure that he had arrived, which he did just shortly after 1 a.m. They were getting him all settled. I was speaking with his nurses. 4 o'clock that morning, I got a call from the doctor stating that Derek's body was failing. He was in multi-organ failure. They were doing all interventions that they could, and he was not responding. His blood pressure was critically low, and they had him on 3 different pressors, which is medications they use to increase your blood pressure. They were doing everything they could. And at that point, he was starting to struggle with breathing. So they were giving him a little bit longer before they decided to put him on a vent, but he told me I needed to get to the hospital and get there soon. So I called my mom and told her what was going on, and she was dealing with her own stuff at that time and half asleep and all of those things and not really comprehending what was happening. So I called my amazing daycare, and she just told me, bring him up and I'll take him. So I loaded up the girls, had them dropped off to daycare. I think it was 5 a.m. at that point. And was making my way to the U, which is normally 30-40 minute drive. That day in that weather took 2.5 hours. I was calling constantly to the hospital. I was trying to contact Derek's family, all of those kinds of things, through my voice dialing while I was driving through this blizzard. Not really sure what to do, but just knowing I needed to get there and get there fast, and nothing was fast enough. It was just after 6 a.m, speaking with the nurses. They couldn't wait any longer for me to get there. They had to put him on the vent. So I talked to him through the phone. The nurse held the phone up so I could talk to him. See, that's why I didn't wear makeup. This is fresh out of the shower for this reason. Got to, hear him say, I love you, as they were putting the vent on him. So I got to the hospital just after 7 and walked into a very different scenario from what I had left. When I'd left him, he was talking and I thought coherent, giving me the I love you sign from the ambulance as he was leaving and the girls and I were heading home. Walking in, he was on a vent. He had 16 different lines running in and out of his body, even in his feet. Completely unresponsive. His body was so swollen. And, retaining a lot of fluid and toxins, and he was in multi-organ failure. So the doctors that were surrounding him broke off a little bit, came over, had me sit down, and started speaking with me. At that time, they told me that he was critically ill and that they wanted me to bring up any family members that would want to say their goodbyes. They were doing all the interventions they could. He was not responding, and not only was he not responding, he was getting worse. So they told me that we had less than 24 hours to bring up the people that needed to be there, and started talking to me about funeral arrangements and his final wishes, what to do with him when everything happened, who I wanted to be by my side when everything happened. So super difficult conversations. A year and a half into marriage, and just a few short years into our life together. So, and only 40 years old. But I guess that's, something you're never prepared for, no matter how long you're together. So, the doctors were having those conversations with me. Their social worker up there, her name is Emily, and she is fantastic. I mean, they just don't make them like that sweet woman. She was pure angel. She stayed with me, kept asking me to have someone come up there and be with me. I was very stubborn, shocker, that I didn't want anyone else to have to see what I was seeing. I didn't want anybody else to have those memories. I didn't want anybody else to have to recover from being part of that. I didn't want that. I was prepared to take all of that on my shoulders, and I was okay with that. There was nobody in my life or in our life that I would want to have to put that onto. So Emily stayed with me right by my side for hours and hours and hours. Made sure that I was drinking, at least telling me to pick up a cup and take a drink of water every once in a while. Replacing my mask as I had cried through each one. And it was just this influx of doctors and specialists and care teams and religious people coming in and asking about preferences, and just decision after decision after decision. He had 4 nurses initially that were with him 24 hours a day. They started him on dialysis, and when they were doing that, they actually didn't have enough staff, those poor nurses. So I actually was helping them. I had to, hold his head and drape up and all of that stuff to have the sanitary measures and things that they do for those procedures, as they put in his arterial lines and all of that, to start the dialysis. So he had lines running out of one side of his neck, and then I helped them for the procedure for the other side, and set up the dialysis. I can't tell you how many procedures I was holding him for or helping them with, and gloving up and just right there. For anybody that's been through something like that, you just feel so helpless. And so as much as they felt bad for asking for help, it was so empowering for me to have something I could do besides just sit there and watch what was happening and not have anything. So got him on the dialysis, had those conversations. They told us that they were still running tests. Everything was still very preliminary. They knew at that point that he had leukemia. However, he was not stable enough to do a bone marrow biopsy to do the confirmations that they needed to find out what type and all of that stuff. And quite honestly, for the first few days, he wasn't talking about treatment. It wasn't a matter of treatment. It was a matter of final preparations. They had no plan for us walking out of there together. And it came up a few times in my brain how real the possibility was that I was going to be driving back home from that hospital alone and having to explain to our kids that he wasn't coming back. I wasn't ready to do that. So, they always say that if love could have saved you, you would never go. And I feel like that's 110% true. I mean, there's so many people out there that have lost some really, really special people. I don't feel like there's anything exceptional or miraculous or any of those things that allow some people to stay and some people do not. I have no explanation for how we came back from that to where we are now, and some don't. So it's hard, but anyway, so we, through the initial testing, one of the oncology teams had come in and told me that they had started to run a different test. They didn't think it was going to come back positive, but it was something they were just confirming and making sure before they moved forward. And the next 24 to 48 hours were what they were expecting for his longevity before everything would happen. But they wanted to try to get this test back. The next morning, they came in and told me they did get those test results back, and that he did, in fact, not just have leukemia, he also had something called HLH. It's a complication that's really rare that comes along with cancer, that basically shuts down all of your organs. It's what it does, and it's fatal. The fatality expectation with that is 24 to 72 hours, and there's nothing that they can really do about it. They treat it with steroids. They were already doing all of that. He already had all of the interventions that they could provide at that point. So there wasn't anything we could do but continue to wait and continue to hope and continue to talk to him and continue to try to bring him back. And, you know, the nurses were great, and they were doing really well. So 4 nurses around the clock. I mean, it was crowded in there, but man, they did so good with him. And the rest of the staff, the doctors, everybody would walk in that room and they would look at Derek and do what they needed to do for that assessment. And then they would walk over to me and just grab my hand and tell me that they were sorry. And that went on for days. So they started to see some small signs of improvement in his levels. So even though he was retaining so much fluid, I mean, the leg that had the Charlie horse, he thought was the Charlie horse, was so swollen. And even though he was in a coma, completely not responsive, if a sheet even touched that leg, his entire body would wince in pain and jerk in pain. The pain coming from that leg was beyond anything I've ever seen. And you could see every day the amount of progression that whatever was going on in there was making. It would just double in size overnight. The redness around it, it almost looked like hands like crawling across his leg. You could even see like the fingers and everything wrapping around. It went from hip all the way down to ankle within a few days, and had his legs so swollen and so full of everything that he would get little like water blisters, I guess. He was literally oozing fluid out of his pores in his leg. And it was just causing him so much pain. So we've had an issue with that from literally day one. But as they started to see some improvement, it was about day 3. They had told me that they were actually preparing to take him off of dialysis, hopefully. They were preparing to take him off of the ventilator to see how he did. They started seeing him start to come back. That dialysis was making a really big difference, along with all of those other interventions. He was still critically ill. They were still not promising me anything at that point, but hopefully giving me some time. His brother flew in from Florida to come up and be with him, and his brother was actually there when they took him off the ventilator. I think he was still on the dialysis, I believe, for maybe another day. And by that time, our dear friend Jared had gone and picked up his oldest son and had him up there so that he could, if nothing else, at least have his goodbyes with his dad and stuff. So he was in off and on throughout all of this as well, initially. As far as the younger kids, I decided, there wasn't really any we. When I said I didn't want anybody else to have those memories, it included my kids. So I didn't have anybody else come up there. I didn't have my mom. I didn't have my dad. I didn't have anybody. That's stuff that I was in super protection mode. And so nobody else was going to see something that was going to hurt them like I was seeing. So there wasn't a lot I could do for Derek, but I was going to protect everybody else too. So that's kind of how that went. And that's not something noble. That's not something unique. I can guarantee you that a lot of people in this situation go through that same process and decide what's right and what's not right for them. And this is just where I was in that scenario. By day 3, like I said, his brother was flying in from Florida. They were able to take him off some of those things. Things started to look a little better. And we started to get some actual diagnosis. So they tossed around a few different ones initially, between AML and APL. The final thing that they decided on, once he was well enough and they actually could do the bone marrow biopsy, which was close to a week, I believe, up there, before they did that, somewhere in that 3 to 5 day range, I believe. They did the bone marrow biopsy, which I actually did leave the room for that one. That was one procedure I did not stay for. They had so many people having to hold him down for that. And anybody that goes through those, my heart is so with you, because that is just unbearable. Bad stuff. But the final diagnosis was that he had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is B-cell ALL. He also had complications from severe infection. His body was basically taken over with toxins that was helping to shut everything down. And the HLH that was shutting all of his organs down and rapidly killing him at the time. So the way that they dealt with the HLH with the steroids, they started to see some turnaround in that, pumping him full of the antibiotics to try to address all of the infection and toxins, the dialysis flushing him. It was a combination of so many things that helped to bring him back. Once we got him out of the ICU, which was March 2nd, so he was in there from February 21st to March 2nd before they were able to move him to a treatment floor and out of ICU. I know this because the twins' birthday is March 3rd. And I took them to Disney on Ice on March 2nd because we'd had those tickets as a family to go for their birthday and surprise them. And he at that point was talking enough that he told me I needed to still take them, and so I did. And that's when they decided to move him. So there was a lot of guilt associated with that. But Jared, our friend, was there with him, and that was comforting, and that helped a lot. But it was a really long stay up in the ICU with the most amazing staff, and he made the most amazing progress. They were doing physical therapy with him. There was procedure after procedure, test after test. Excuse me. And we actually started to realize we were kind of coming out of it and that we were going to start addressing this cancer thing. He'd made it. So through all of the delirium, through There's so many things. The physical therapist that was working with him, his name was Mitch. Mitch was incredible. Mitch and I went through a lot of things together with Derek as we were trying to pull him out of all of that delirium and get him back to trying to function again. They were worried about his brain function. They did some CT scans. They found a small brain bleed. Then they decided that his body was just still so sick. It wasn't related to the brain bleed, why he couldn't come out of the sedation and why he wasn't getting that brain activity back that they wanted. For as rapid as everything progressed, realistically, how quickly he recovered and was able to move, it also felt like it was going so incredibly slow. Just kind of this twin world scenario. I don't know, just a whole nother reality. But he, at that point, once we moved out of ICU, had to learn how to speak. He had to learn how to eat. He had to learn how to walk. He had to learn how to use the restroom. There was a lot of stuff that had to happen after being through all of the things that he had been through. That stuff changes you. Both of us. It changed him going through all of that. It changed me witnessing and being there for all of that. It's one of those life-altering experiences where you have before that and you have after that. You'll never be the same person before as you are after. Our relationship is not the same. We are not the same as individuals. The way that he speaks and acts and does things are not the same. My responses to things are not the same. Our family dynamic has changed drastically. Our career stuff. Derek had been at his employer for around 6 months when all of this happened. And they were so great. They kept him on through a lot of this initial stuff. We were so supportive of our family, so supportive of me, until they had to fill his position. So there was a lot, because not only was this man having to learn how to redo all of these things and learn how to do this stuff again, baby stepping through things that should feel normal, that should be normal, and that frustration. Also realizing that he had lost his job and trying to find his value through that and how he was going to deal with that. There's so much aftermath that comes from critical illness, that comes from these kinds of diagnoses, this treatment. This is years. This stuff changes everything for the rest of your life. Derek's cancer is one that has a very high success rate for remission, which is great. That was super encouraging while we were in the hospital and we finally got that diagnosis, and great. Like, the success rates are wonderful for this. Leukemia is something that's extremely curable, his type and with his age and all of those factors. That being said, the rate of recurrence is extremely high. It's like in the 80-something%. It's super high. Within the first 3 years, recurrence is way high. And you're not considered cured until you've been 5 years from remission. So June was the last time that he had anything detected. He's been in remission since June. That was the first one that came back without any cancer being detected. So we've got 5 years from June before he will be cured. That being said, we've progressed a lot. There's been a lot of complications through all of that. Our lives, both of our lives, have become consumed with constant worry about what happens if it comes back. Is this just a cough? Is this just a sneeze? Is this an infection? I don't feel good today. Is this something bigger? Doing the girl's birthday alone without him, their school activities alone without him, so many holidays, back to being a solo parent, as well as a caregiver at the same time, and having the kids try to feel as normal as possible. I've worked so hard to try to not let all of these things that are changing both of us affect them. And I know that that's unrealistic. I really do. It's going to affect them, and it should. This is the stuff in life that affects you. But also your mama bear heart, all of those things, you don't want it to. You don't want your kids to feel that pain, that worry, that fear, the uneasiness, any of that stuff. I don't want my kids to feel like every day is so incredibly fragile that they can't function. They're now 7 years old. They were 6 at the beginning of all of this. But it's constantly trying to find that balance of having an awareness of how precious life is and being aware that you still have to function in life. You still have to go to work. You still have to do all of these things. While we were going through all of this, once he got out of ICU, he was down on the treatment floor. And then when he was released from the hospital, we actually had decided that I needed to be 2 people as far as income and all of that because of where we were at. He wasn't going to be able to work for a long time. He didn't work for 10 months. So I went to school. I got my real estate license. I passed my test and did all of those things to find my second career. I wasn't doing this because I didn't feel like he would ever be able to. I wasn't doing this because I don't know what the reasons would have been to do it or to not do it. I'll be honest with you. I did it because I was trying to find a way, and this was something that I'd already had some friends that had gone through this. I'd watched their process. It seemed something that I could feasibly manage with my 9-to-5 career, my family, and my real estate profession. So that's what I'm doing. I knew it was going to be hard. I'm not afraid of hard things. I knew that going in. Man, has it been hard. Trying to feel confident and know that I'm learning all of the things that I need to learn, putting myself out there when, quite honestly, I've been at my lowest, to try to present myself in the best light possible. Initially, that was my thought, right? Since then, I've been real and decided that I'm me. I work hard. I give everything I can, and I'm just going to be real, and that's the best I can do. And I feel like that's okay. I can do it still. So, but it has come with a lot of challenges as well. trying to balance that in there as well. Trying to give 110% in all of those areas. You can burn out and you can be tired. So now that's kind of my goal for 2024 is to let things lie where they are, be okay with the corner of the kitchen not being exactly the way that I like it to be. Being okay with good enough when it comes to some of the housework and things that I've always had kind of higher standards for, with just being clean and just being okay with that. I'm still struggling with that. I just want to really be blunt with that. My OCD is something that I already dealt with on a daily basis, and toning that down and trying to not feel less than at the same time is now the new struggle. Like, that's the new thing that I'm working on. So being okay with Dad picking out the girls' outfits for school one day and having them not match, and being okay with reading them one bedtime story at night sometimes instead of two, because I just have so much. I hate that because I mom guilt myself like crazy. We've always had traditional roles in our house, the housework, all of those things have always been my area. His was, the vehicles and things like that, the traditional roles. Having to do both of those things, I tore apart a toilet and redid it. I took a freaking Sawzall to one of them to tear them apart and fix it. That had to get done, and those things are on me, and that's okay. At the same time, as frustrating as it is to learn these things in the moment and not be able to feel confident in what I'm doing and just figuring it out and winging it and all of that, it's also empowering the fact that I do it and I've been able to do it. So, I don't know. I feel like that's a lot of rambling, but this would be brain dump number 1. I don't really know what to say about 2023 other than I'm so glad that it is over. I did get some really great things out of 2023. I got a beautiful new grandson, sweet little Jackson. He's just spinning image of his daddy. That's my baby boy and his baby boy, so it's a pretty big deal. We now have 4 grandkids, and that is what life is all about right there. It's those babies. The girls are doing so well. They've handled so much. We were, right before Christmas, I was preparing to go and do Shop with a Cop, something I do every year. It's my favorite thing to do with Christmas. I'm not a big Christmas person. It brings on a lot of stress, and I don't like more stress. So, I was explaining to the girls, because they were wanting to go and do Shop with a Cop. They didn't know why they couldn't go with Mom. So I was explaining to them about what it was and the reason for it being there and its purpose and all of that. And I said, it's for these kids that have kind of had things hard and they've kind of been through bad stuff. And this is a way for them to go and have some fun and have a positive experience. And we were driving at the time that we were having this discussion, and they said, like us, Mom, we've had bad stuff. And I was like, what do you mean? Like what? And Paisley looked at me and she said, well, Mom, Dad's cancer. And man, that's rough. When you realize that your kids now put themselves in that category of little kids that have had bad stuff happen to them, and it's beyond your control, anybody's control. There's nothing you can do about it. You've done the best that you can to protect them and shield them and just cover them in bubble wrap and come out unscathed. And then you realize, even, almost a year in, they put themselves in that category as some bad stuff that's happened to them. And I thought about it for a minute as I was choking back tears, while I'm driving and we're having this conversation. That it's okay. It's okay for them to acknowledge that something bad has happened to them. It's okay that I show them that something bad has happened to me. It's okay that those feelings are there, and it actually needs to be talked about and it needs to be put out. Obviously, you do it to a degree. There's obviously levels that are okay and appropriate and not. I'm not trying to say I'm throwing all of that stuff out there. But I want them to know, it's not the same type of thing as what we were talking about with Shop with a Cop, but yeah, like Dad's cancer. You guys have been through some stuff, and I'm so sorry. But I'm so proud of how you've handled it, and I'm so proud of how strong you are. And I'm so proud of how much you do to try to make yourself and those around you feel good because of that. My girls have changed just as much as me and Derek have. And that's okay. So, 2023, sayonara. So glad you're gone. 2024, we are going to work on rebuilding. We're going to try to move slowly out of this place of fear, of these constant unknowns and wondering when it's going to come back. And is it going to jump from normal to critical in a matter of hours like it did last time? What is this going to look like? All of those millions of things that race through my brain all day, every day. I can just imagine what is going through Derek's. And even my girls. But we're going to try to brain dump. We're going to try to process. We're going to try to take in the good and release the bad as much as we can, but still acknowledge that the bad exists, and that's okay. So, here's to tomorrow.